It's Unrestricted. Hi, everybody. It's Tony Schiavone, and that is
Aubrey Edwards.
Aubrey Edwards, who is the greatest referee that I've ever worked with in my life.
Checks in the mail, Tony.
You got it. Hey, so this edition of Unrestricted, we are going to talk to Aubrey about her career, because I think it's an interesting story. It's a great story because you and I have gotten to know each other doing this podcast together.
It's been super fun.
It has been. Yeah. And my first time that I remember even seeing you was at Double or Nothing, and I was in the stands in Double or Nothing. I was front row
on with the company. At
right,
that point.
I was not. Conrad Thompson got me to go, and he said, "Come on, we'll all sit in the front row together. We'll have a great time." And of course, he didn't show up. He stayed in the back and said hello to everybody. So I remember seeing you in the ring, and I remember thinking, "Wow, she's really good. She's serious. She makes it seem like a sporting event.
It's like a shoot, brother.
Yeah, it is. So I thought it was great, and the fact that you and I are working together is very, very good. I wanted to talk a little bit about, to start out with, as we always do here on Unrestricted, about your beginnings.
Oh, my beginnings.
Yeah, because because you have a lot of background in video games, and that's what you're
right.
That's what you're still kind of involved in that, right?
A little bit.
So tell us about that.
Yeah, so
you started out as a child.
I started as a child.
Right.
I was born on the East Coast.
Right.
My parents met in the Army. That's a fun story.
So you're an Army brat?
No, they actually used me as an excuse to leave the Army.
Oh, okay.
Because they're like, we don't want to raise a kid in the Army, so screw this, we're out.
Right.
Moved to California.
Right.
Actually grew up in Northern California for graduated high school, immediately moved up to Seattle. And I went to Seattle because that's where I got my undergrad in computer science. I went to a school called DigiPen, which is basically like the Ivy League for video game programming. It's a really rough program. They're trying to cram essentially 5 years of college curriculum into 4.
Right.
And it feels like they're charging you for 8, but whatever.
Let me stop you right there.
Yes.
It's interesting because I worked on video games with WCW back in the day, and
Right.
I work with EA Sports,
Right.
and have a lot of friends in the business, and that was back in the 90s. And I know it's changed a great deal.
It's changed quite a bit,
Yeah.
but a lot of it's still the same.
Right.
It's a lot like wrestling, right?
Sure. Is it something that you always wanted to do?
Yes, that was like
From the get-go, you said, I want to work in computers and video games.
Yeah, I was in elementary school, like playing my favorite game of all time is The Legend of Zelda. I was playing Zelda and went, wait, there's people that legit like made this as a living, and now I get to experience this, and it's really, really cool. So that was my whole plan. I didn't actually start watching wrestling until about 2011, which is after I had graduated college. Just to kind of date myself a little bit.
Okay.
So yeah, I did the whole game thing. I was in video games for 10 years. I originally started as a programmer, and then I went into production. And producer is kind of a loaded term in video games because what producer means in like television and movies is completely different than what it means in video games.
What does it mean in video games?
Essentially, I'm the person that makes everything happen. So I'm doing schedules, I'm doing resource management, I'm doing media, I'm doing... essentially, if there's a job that needs doing and it's not anyone's responsibility, it falls on me.
Right.
But I'm
like a general manager, right?
pretty much. It's like I'm managing the team, but I'm not actually creating anything. There's nothing I can point at and say, I did that, that's mine. Like, you can't really print out like a schedule and stick it in a box anymore. Like, that's it's not something that happens.
I understand that, right.
So yeah, I was doing that for like 10 years. Most recently, I was working on like MMOs and VR stuff, like up until about, I think, July of 2019. So I was already involved with AEW. I was still working in games full time.
So you graduate from school.
Yes.
And you go right into the field.
Right into the field.
Okay. And is it true about programmers that they just sit there for hours upon days upon end and look at a screen?
Have you ever seen the movie Grandma's Boy?
I don't think I have, no.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
I recommend it because
Okay.
it's basically like a stereotype of what video game development is like.
Okay.
You've got the dude in the trench coat with his back, like leaning back chair and his 10 monitors and he's super nerdy. Like that's essentially what it is. I think it's, I mean, I jokes aside, like there's a lot of long hours in video games. It's kind of one of the reasons why I don't miss it so much. It's a very creative field, but at the same time, like we all start to get burnt out when we're doing it.
I understand.
For very, very long hours, for very long periods of time. So,
lucrative?
I mean, not as lucrative as like making bank software.
Okay. I guess not.
But it's also not as fun. Like,
Sure.
It's pretty cool to be able to play something and then like see the reactions of people online playing your game.
Sure.
I think that's ultimately like one of the things that really drew me to wrestling is, or being a part of wrestling, is the idea that we're creating something and you have that immediate fan response
Right.
of, here's this thing that we're making. And the fans are enjoying it or they're not enjoying it.
Sure.
And it's a symbiotic relationship between fan and performer that with games, you'd work on something for 5 years, ship it, basically send it away from the nest, and then someone would consume it. And that's it. So this is very nice in the sense that like there's a lot of back and forth, and I really appreciate that.
Seattle, a good place for video
It's pretty much like
games.
it's pretty much like the hub for video
Really?
game development.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a big reason why I still live up there.
Right. One would think it would be Northern California.
Yeah, Northern California had a bit. They had a bit of a boom for a bit. But like Seattle, Austin, Texas for a bit,
Wow.
New York, kind of the major hubs. But like my first job was in downtown Bellevue. And when I left that job, which is like, it's a city like east of Seattle. When I left that job, I specifically chose my next job because my commute was the same, which is a 5-minute walk from my house. Instead of walking 5 minutes east, I walked 5 minutes south to just a different building.
Right.
My most recent job was in downtown Seattle, and 2 blocks away, my husband worked at another video game studio.
Okay.
So that we would just get lunch all the time and whatnot.
right.
Yeah. My gym is right next to Bungie, who did like Halo and
Okay.
Destiny and all of that. So
All
like
right.
I literally get out of the elevator to go to LA Fitness, and it's like, oh yeah, no, there's a giant Destiny poster.
We're talking with Aubrey Edwards, AEW Unrestricted, our podcast. And I'm Tony Schiavone, and this is all interesting stuff. And I say that because I had 4 boys in the 90s and 1 girl, and so video games were a big part of our life.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Very big part of our lives. And actually, I played video games along with them a lot, too.
That's actually like what I got into it.
Right.
Like my mom played them a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pictures of her and me when I'm really young, like because the Game Boys back in the 80s were massive.
Right.
So I couldn't hold it because my hands were so small. I was like 2 or 3. So my mom would play and I'd sit behind her and watch her play. And that was
Right.
how I played video games, air quotes. And then when she was pregnant with my sister, we would like sit and play like Sega because
Right.
she couldn't do anything. She was bigger than a house.
Right.
So like we just played video games together constantly as a family.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
Yeah, it was super
Playing
awesome.
video games together as a family.
Right. It's video games get a bad rap because it's like people
it
who don't
does.
understand them, like, oh, well, this is bad and it's introducing violence to kids and all this stuff. But it's like it's literally been a part of my childhood. Like I played NBA Jam with my dad, and that was the thing that got me into basketball initially. Was like a video game, not even basketball.
Right.
But I always played Deadlift Shrimp on the Sonics.
Yeah.
That was my go-to.
Then they stole your team and moved to Oklahoma City.
We don't like to talk about
Okay,
that.
we won't. So Aubrey, you mentioned your husband. Is he into video games, computers? That his vocation?
Yeah, we actually met at my freshman orientation in college. He was a junior. He invited me to a party. Your typical like college story, right? Like
Right.
boy meets girl, boy invites girl to party. 15 years later, they've been married for a very long time. The difference though with my school is that there was like 200 in my freshman class, and I was one of 8 girls. So like I was really popular for about a week. And then I started dating my husband, and then nobody talked to me.
I bet. I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're still into video games,
I am. I'm actually playing more now than I used to.
right?
I think traveling has definitely helped with that.
Right.
Like I'm doing a lot of Nintendo Switch just because
Right.
I can play it on the airplane and whatnot. I think I'm playing more now than I was in recent years just because I'm not in it so much anymore. It's a lot easier to have it feel like fun and not like work.
Right.
So.
I used to there was a video game called Silent Hill.
Oh, yeah.
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 A real creepy video game.
Super creepy.
Okay, so when I was traveling with WCW, I would bring a whatever
Like a PlayStation.
PlayStation. We had PlayStation 2, I guess.
Yeah,
PlayStation,
yeah.
And I would try to hook it into the back of a monitor, which was difficult to do.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, at the time that wasn't really easy. Now they've got the switch boxes in the
I know they
hotels, so
do.
you make it really easy.
I know. So all my years of traveling with a minor league baseball team, all these guys have these cases.
Yeah.
And they're carrying their video games with them.
There's still some guys in like wrestling that do that.
Really?
Yeah. There's one of the refs over at the other company definitely like brings his PlayStation 4 along with him to like every hotel room he's in and just plays games constantly.
Sure. Well, PlayStation 4 is kind of more than just a
right.
video game
You've got
console.
your DVD. Like they're all encompassing now,
Right.
which is insane to me.
Right.
Like that it's not just like take out a cartridge, blow on it, and put it back in when it's not working. It's like, no, this is a full-on media center now. Technology's wild.
It's wild, and it's also, obviously, I would think, by the way, this is a podcast about wrestling, and we are going to get to wrestling, but we're talking
100% about wrestling.
Yes, we're going to talk to Aubrey
Totally.
Edwards, talking about her great background in
non-wrestling.
In non-wrestling. Because we all have had a background in non-wrestling.
Right. I mean, we all come from different walks of life. That's
Right.
one of the things that's really interesting about wrestling.
Yeah, it is. But I would think, well, I know that back in the 90s when I was doing video games and doing some work with EA Sports, the internet was not as prevalent as it is now.
No.
And I think now, am I right with the internet, that the video game boom, especially the money that the video games can make, is incredible now.
It's massive, and I think part of that is like the community building aspect, like the fact that people can play on games online with strangers and build all of these friendships from that. It's a huge thing that just had never been really accessible before.
Your mom ever tell you not to talk with strangers?
She did, but I'm pretty outgoing, so it ends up happening a lot anyway.
I know you are.
Yeah.
Don't text with strangers, Aubrey.
I definitely don't text with strangers. Hey, who's this? Here's a dick pic. Like, it doesn't happen to you, Tony?
No, that's never happened to me before.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
I've got some fun stories later.
I bet you do.
Oh, boy.
So you're from Seattle. You still live in Seattle.
Correct.
And
Long flights every week.
long flights every week. And obviously, I would ask you, do you like Seattle? And the answer would be yes, it's my home.
Right. Well, I love it. I love the weather. A lot of people like think of Seattle and they think it's raining constantly.
Raining all the time, right?
And it's not necessarily like pouring rain all the time. Like there's a nice mist, or it just got done raining. Like I think I lived there like 10 years before I ever bought a raincoat. You just kind of like keep wearing more hoodies.
Okay.
Just layer on the hood. I went 12 years before I got an umbrella.
Right.
Just little things. It's not that bad.
But the sun does shine there.
It does. Like our summers are gorgeous. We try to not tell people that so we can keep them out. But August and September, it's like 70, 75 degrees, not a cloud in the sky. It's gorgeous.
Sure.
It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And like Seattle has just so much color and there's so much green and blue with all the water. Got lots of great food. But yeah, like I went up there for one industry and I built a whole life. All my friends are out there. I own a condo. That's pretty dope.
Right.
But yeah, so I think that's one of the reasons why I really like working for a company like AEW.
Right.
Is that I can still maintain this part of my life that I built before this company, and they're totally cool with that.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about working with Tony Khan and
It's
working.
so good.
It's unbelievable. And now because of everything is so closer together now because of the internet and because telephones and
Right.
You don't have to all be in one place anymore.
Exactly. It's like we all work remote.
Right.
Like since I came on for the project coordinator job with the office, like I do most of my communication all just through email, which you can
Right.
do on your phone now. So
Right.
like I don't need to be in a particular place in order to work with people. But that means that the one day a week where I am with people, it's that much more important to me that
Right.
we all get to hang out because I only get to see my coworkers one day a week now, maybe if they're booked. So.
Well, her transition from video games and computers to wrestling is an interesting story. We're talking with Aubrey Edwards on AEW Unrestricted. We're talking with Aubrey Edwards.
That's right, you are.
Yes, we are. One of the great referees, and not only that, one of the great people behind the scenes in AEW. And before we talk about your workload that you have here in All Elite Wrestling, by the way, this is the podcast, the official podcast of All Elite Wrestling, and my name is Tony Schiavone. I'm the guy on the TV show that says, "You're right, JR. You're right, Excalibur."
You say that really well.
I know, and I get paid for it. Life is good. So let's talk about the transition. You mentioned earlier that you got into wrestling in 2011 or didn't even know about pro wrestling until 2011?
Yeah, so I didn't know. Well, like everyone knows about wrestling,
Oh, yeah,
right?
sure.
Like everyone
Right.
knows who Hulk Hogan is.
But you weren't a fan,
No,
right?
I never watched it as a kid growing up. Like I didn't have like brothers who got me into it. Like my dad hated it.
Yeah.
But it was never something that was a part of my life. And then one year, I think it was WrestleMania 27, they had The Rock and Stone Cold come back to host. And all of my friends who watched wrestling growing up were like, ooh, they're coming back. Let's have a WrestleMania party. So we treated it like the Super Bowl. We all brought over like dishes. We had prop bets and stuff.
Okay.
And I literally don't know anything that's happening. Like I'm Googling who The Undertaker is.
Okay.
That'll tell you a little bit about like my level of understanding for wrestling at that point. And I kind of didn't really like stay with it. It was like, okay, this is cool and interesting. Great. Fine. Whatever. But that was the thing that hooked my husband back into it because he watched as a kid. And about a month or so later on an episode of Raw, there was the CM Punk pipe bomb. And I come home from work and my husband's like, you have to see this. So he shows me this clip. And it was in that moment that I realized that wrestling is actually just a form of storytelling. Because I'm watching this thing going, I don't know how much of this is real or not. And that's really cool that I don't know anything about this character or this story, but I'm immediately invested. And from that moment, I was hooked. And I'm very much... I have the type of personality that when I'm into something, I go into it 100%. So I started watching WWE. I'd start Googling all these wrestlers as they came up. Oh, what's Ring of Honor? Oh, what are the independents? What's Evolve? Who's this guy? And then finding out all these other things. And then I think like WrestleMania 31, we actually like went down to San Diego. 32, we went to Dallas. Like,
oh, wow. So,
yeah.
So
we went to Takeover Brooklyn. Like, I'm literally planning like my
really
family trips around takeovers so I can justify going to New York. Yes. Yeah. So I went deep into it because I had so much to catch up on.
Right.
Like, and I wanted to know all of these things and I was enjoying all of these aspects of it. And if there's something I wasn't liking, there's so much out there that I could find something else.
Right.
There's a lot of characters that I got drawn to because I saw myself in them. Like my favorite wrestler was Daniel Bryan. Like, there's this really famous picture of me. So Daniel Bryan's from Seattle, from outside of Seattle. He's from Aberdeen. But his retirement show he was at, and he did it at Key Arena in Seattle where the Sonics played. And I'm in the front row just bawling my eyes out. And it's this, like, if you actually look like Daniel Bryan crying girl online, like my face comes up and I'm just crying.
I'm going to have to check it out.
Yeah. It's pretty ridiculous that, like, when you become like a meme because of your wrestling fandom. Right. And then later on, like, like years later, someone on Reddit was like, wait, is that Aubrey? I'm like, yeah, no, that's definitely me. Like,
wow.
I get invested, dude. Those are real goddamn tears.
So this is really interesting. So you have no knowledge of pro wrestling.
None.
You're in the video game world, the computer
Correct.
world, and now all of a sudden the CM Punk pipe bomb thing, you see that, and you get caught up in the bug, but you're caught up in the bug as a fan.
Correct.
Did you think, now this is something I want to do?
It never crossed my mind.
Really?
Because so video games was my profession, but my hobby for the majority of my entire life is I was a classically trained ballet dancer. So I started dancing when I was 9 and basically stuck with that.
Right.
At one point I was trying to go pro and I was too tall and I was too curvy. Ballerinas, they want a very particular look. You have to be like 5'2", real thin,
right.
Brunette. Like if you're not that, you're not going to make it. So
this is all great stuff.
Yeah.
Video games, classically trained ballerina.
I'm all over the place. I'm
Wow.
a cornucopia of interesting stories.
Yes, you are.
So yeah, I did dance for a really, really long time. And it was around early 2017. There were a couple of things happening in my life at the time, but eventually I ended up retiring from dance.
Okay.
I'm not that old.
I don't think you are.
No, I'm 32, but in dance
You don't
years,
look a day over 31.
the makeup's really good.
Yeah.
You start kind of getting up there as a dancer. Like it really just takes a toll on your body. So I was looking at closing out that part of my life anyway. And I didn't realize at the time how important performing was to me as a form of creative expression. So I got seriously depressed. And right about that time, the referees at one of my local indies, 3-2-1 Battle, said, "Hey, we're looking for more refs. Have you ever considered this?" I'm like, "No, why?" And they're like, "Well, you know the whole roster. You come to our shows." My husband was actually a wrestler on the show, so he had been wrestling for about 1.5 years, and I was content with just being a supportive wife and in with the fans and cheering, supporting all that. But I'm like, yeah, I guess I could try. I don't understand like why. Like I didn't see the parallels initially, and once I started training, it all clicked. Because if you've ever seen you've seen the Nutcracker, right?
Yes.
So in the Nutcracker, you have something like Snow Scene, where you've got one of the dancers in the front in her tutu. She's probably on the poster dancing, and she's really, really good. And then you've got about 20 dancers behind behind her that are just there as like enhancement to make her look good. So that's essentially what a referee is. Like, I'm there to help the guys on the poster that you actually came to see tell a story.
Right. You're not the girl in the tutu.
No, I'm totally fine wearing the longer skirt that hides the bent knees and
Right.
kind of just standing in the back, smiling, looking pretty, posing.
So let me ask you this. So
Yeah.
you apparently, from what you're telling me, you went to WrestleMania. You went all around the country to see the big events.
No intention of ever joining the business.
But you were also, and your husband, I guess, you were also into the independent wrestling scene too.
Yeah,
How'd you get caught up in that?
It's kind of hard to like not get into independence if you're following these guys who have had these storied careers, right? Like I'd said, like my favorite wrestler was Daniel Bryan, and like he had a huge run in Ring of Honor for a long time.
Sure.
So learning about Ring of Honor and then finding like that's how I learned about the Young Bucks.
Right.
Was I suddenly started watching a lot of Ring of Honor. It was like, oh, who are these guys? Like
Sure.
whatnot. But it's interesting because the state of Washington has a lot of restrictions on professional wrestling. It's only
Really?
Yeah, their
Like what?
Department of Licensing is real athletic commissions. You know
Government
the deal.
getting involved.
You know the deal. Like
Yes.
some yarder got hurt and then government officials got mad and they're like, no, you can't run shows and charge money. So, which is like short version. That's essentially what happened. So independent wrestling in Washington basically died. And a lot of the shows that were happening under the radar. They weren't advertised. You couldn't really like talk about them at all because if the DOL found out, they would just shut you down.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a
like
very
bootleg
interesting
whiskey.
time. Pretty much, it felt like prohibition, but for wrestling.
Right.
So I had mentioned this company 321 Battle. So that was the company that was the first independent show in Washington I had seen. We heard about it on some thread online, and we went. It was a Halloween show, and it's like literally in the bottom floor of a combat gym underneath two music venues and a bar. It's pretty much the most punk rock thing that like I had done at that point. And I think I even left early because I'm like, oh, main event, it's 11 o'clock. I need to be up early. Like totally like not my life now.
Okay.
But yeah, it was like the most interesting thing I had ever seen. And it's very silly, kind of on the weird spectrum of wrestling, not necessarily the more like super indie stuff. But since I started discovering the independents locally, a lot of the stuff in Washington has changed. So now we've got this sort of boom happening. Got a number of companies that are popping up the area.
That's
Defy,
good.
Without a Cause. So for me, like it was great because I actually had a very full indie schedule without having to leave Seattle.
Right. So they ask you, would you like to be a referee? And you said,
I said, sure, I'll try it.
yeah.
So there was
And-
actually like a tryout where it's
Okay.
like, okay, you know the rules. We're going to have these guys call like a little 5-minute match and just do what you would normally do. And it was really
like in the back with no fans, just
yeah, it was
just
like a practice setting.
A practice session,
right?
Okay,
So
I
it's
got
like
it.
you got a couple people there like taking notes and stuff, but the lights are on, nobody's cheering. Like
Sure.
it's very all of the dramatic and the romantic nature of a wrestling show is just gone.
Right.
But yeah, so I'm kind of standing behind wrestlers, which already is throwing me off because I've only watched wrestling from the front. And I fed a lot off of like social cues and body language, especially being a dancer. So you could kind of see what was coming next. And immediately standing behind wrestlers, I have no idea what's happening.
Sure.
So I'm getting in the way. I have no idea what to do with my hands.
Right.
Even though I know the rules, I'm like, oh yeah, no, I should be doing something here. Oh my God, no, he's on the rope. I need to count to 5, right?
Right,
like
right.
I'm like trying to remember all of
Sure.
the things that I know, but it's just so difficult. And it was really terrible. And I got in my car and I cried. It was real bad. But I'm a firm believer in like trying something once doesn't necessarily give you an understanding of what it is. So I tried it again, and the second time was much more fun because it's not as aggravating.
Well, did they invite you back for a second?
Yeah, they
So you
basic-
must have been okay.
Right,
mean,
I guess
everybody's
so.
hard on themselves.
I guess so. I don't know. Maybe it's a draw to have a lady, and it's like, hey, let's just get her there.
Right.
Right.
Sure.
She checks that box.
That's right.
But yeah, so they said that I had potential. It's the famous line. So I went back and I practiced for about 2 months, and then they put me on a show, and that was July of 2017. So timeline wise, it's
Wow, it's not that long ago.
yeah, I haven't been doing this it's only been like 2.5 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So you went from that, and give us your progression.
I worked my home promotion, 321 Battle, for about for about 3 months. And then I started branching out of the area. I went up to Vancouver and worked with ECCW.
Okay.
They're one of the most well-known companies up in that region of Canada. So I worked with them on their roster, and then I started to kind of branch out a little bit more, working more in Oregon for West Coast Wrestling Connection. At one point, I actually drove down to San Diego, which is about a 22-hour drive.
Yeah, right down the coast.
That was the first time I met Rick Knox, because he was booked for a show.
Independent wrestling.
Independent wrestling. It was this promotion called Ground Zero down in San Diego.
Right.
Rick Knox was supposed to work it, but he had just taken a choke slam at PWG, and his collarbone had been broken. Because Rick Knox is a friggin' legend.
He is.
But it's cool to still have him like in the back, like critiquing your match and giving you feedback and stuff. I actually credit him to helping me with tag team wrestling, because tag team wrestling is just very, very complicated, and there's so many nuances that you just don't see in any other match format. And I hated them.
Right.
Because it's just so much to worry about, and I wasn't having fun with them. And sitting down with Knox and being able to ask, like, how do I handle this situation? He gave me a lot of pointers. Kind of changed my perspective on it a bit.
You're still working in video games this time? Or?
Yeah, so I was working in video games pretty much the entirety of it.
Okay, because independent wrestling really
it doesn't
can't
pay,
really
and like hot dog and a handshake, right?
Right.
Like you get your gas money covered if you have like 5 guys piled in a car.
You
like,
do it because you love it.
You do it because you love it, right? Like I'd basically have some spending cash to buy a couple candy bars at a gas station, but I was rolling in it, dude. And that's why everyone sells merch.
Exactly.
That is the reason why.
Right.
Because merch is where you make your money. You don't make your money on POs.
Right. God bless Pro Wrestling Tees.
God bless Pro Wrestling Tees.
Yeah, those guys
thank
are the
you
best.
for everything.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so 2017, I primarily worked Pacific Northwest. And then early 2018, I started branching out. I actually did my first show during a WrestleMania weekend. I did Beyond Wrestling, and I reffed the Shine Championship match at a WWN show. So I was just finding all of these little things that I could do in interesting places. I did a show in Florida. Basically, I do the thing where if I'm traveling somewhere to visit family, I'd see what was going on that weekend and see if I could maybe get on an indie show at the time.
Okay.
Just because I wanted to work. I had this thirst for knowledge.
Yeah.
It kind of comes back from that perspective of I'm going to learn as much as I possibly can. Like there's so much to this aspect of the business that I had no idea existed. And now I just want to learn as much as I possibly can and get as good as I can.
Right.
And working for different companies and different people and different promoters, you just learn all of these different things that you can then apply to, you know, the places you work regularly and just become better. And that was really all it was, is that I just was striving to do as much as I possibly could. Mm-hmm. So I ended up doing a couple more shows in California, kind of all over the place. And then I ended up doing the Mae Young Classic with WWE in 2018.
How did you get booked on that?
So Jessica Carr, who's now on SmackDown,
Okay.
she was their first full-time female referee.
Right.
So she started reffing right around the same time I did. She had been wrestling for 10 years prior, so her story is very different than mine. But we had gotten in contact through a mutual friend of ours, Brutal Bob, and we just kind of like touch base every now and then, see how we're all doing. She'd watch some tape, give me some feedback and whatnot. And there's not a lot of women in the business, so we kind of all have to support each other.
Right.
But it was right around June where she hit me up and said they're looking for another lady ref for the Mae Young Classic, and she asked if I would be interested in coming by for a tryout. I'm like, yeah, of course, please. So I did the tryout.
Where was the tryout?
It was
Orlando?
in Florida. It was in the Performance Center.
Okay.
Yeah, so I went out for a week. It was back when NXT was still taped in advance.
Right.
It was during an NXT taping week.
Okay.
So I actually had a dark match. It was like 3 minutes bell to bell, because that's just what it is.
Right.
And they apparently liked me enough that they had me do the Mae Young Classic, which was another week at the Performance Center. And then that was early August. And then September, they had me back. We did like an NXT live loop that weekend. So I did 3 cities in Florida on top of like an in-Performance Center show, and just getting all of this information and knowledge and whatnot. And then
You got to be pretty thrilled by this time.
dude, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Like I'm a freaking baby,
Right.
and I'm learning all of this stuff that people would just kill for.
Right.
I ended up doing the Evolution pay-per-view. I was on the outside for the Battle Royal.
Right.
So it's like I'm literally a year and a half in, and I'm doing a show with like 12,000 people in New York. Like, sure, it's a Battle Royal. It's only like 8 minutes, and I'm barely on screen, but it's
Right.
like the experience of it, right?
Sure.
But yeah. And then now it was 2019. It was kind of
2019.
crazy.
Yeah. I guess so. We're talking with
Who
Aubrey.
would've thought?
Who would have thought? We're talking with Aubrey Edwards on our AEW Unrestricted podcast.
Yeah.
Coming up next, we'll talk about her roles with All Elite Wrestling, which are more than just being a referee.
Yeah.
We're talking with Aubrey Edwards on AEW Unrestricted. I'm Tony Schiavone, and we've talked about your career in video games and computers and independent scene, and you're in the Mae Young Classic, and you're doing some things on the NXT Loop. And,
yeah. I'm doing pretty much everything at that point.
Right.
And like not getting signed. So that was
Right,
weird.
So that was my next question. They didn't offer you anything.
No, they never did. And I mean, like every company kind of runs its own way, and I can't fault someone for like not hiring someone specifically. Like maybe it was just wrong time. Maybe I said something that offended somebody. I don't friggin' know.
Yeah.
Who knows, right? But I know that I got a lot of really great information out of it. I got amazing experiences out of it. So, yeah, I mean, it kind of sucks because I'm putting all this time into it. And I'm taking time off of work, and I just want someone to love me and hold me and tell me everything's going to be okay. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I guess I'm on the indies forever.
Right.
Okay, guys, bye.
So AEW comes into the fold. And
yeah, talk about timing, right?
Right. I think you and I had lunch recently, and we talked about, do you believe in things that are meant to be?
Right, and I don't. I
don't either, but it almost sounded like this was meant to be.
I believe in being prepared for opportunities.
Right.
And I've been very much, a lot of my success is due to very, very good timing on whatever may be happening. Like, I mean, I tried to make this my life before it actually was. Like, I wanted to commit to it. I started lifting weights and working out because someone said that a referee should look like they are able to break up a fight. I'm like, well, I'm a tiny, right. And I'm like this tiny little girl with these big dudes in the ring. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess I better beef up, get some muscle.
Right.
I started eating better, tried to sleep better, which is really hard when you work in the indies and you're
I'm sure
on the road all the time. But basically like trying to make it a full-time thing before it was a thing, because who knows when opportunities are going to come around. Right. So do what I can in the meantime. And then turns out when you end up on a show with Frankie Kazarian and All Elite Wrestling has just been announced, like things kind of hopefully work out.
Right.
And they did.
So Frankie Kazarian had a great impact on this?
Yeah. So he was basically the guy that put my name into the pot with the Young Bucks. It was like 3 weeks before AEW was announced. It was around Christmas season. And we were on a show together up in Canada. And I reffed one of his matches. I actually fucked up the finish. It was... Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. It's not like a wrestler hasn't before.
Right. No, it's not like this doesn't happen, you know. You never want it to happen.
Right.
And especially like when any match could be a job interview, it's kind of like, oh God. But if you ask Frankie about it, he'll actually tell you that it made the match better.
Okay.
I disagree, but whatever. Essentially what had happened is that the guy he was pinning, Frankie was a babyface, he was pinning the heel. And I counted the 3, called for the bell. They started playing Frankie's music. And then I look over and his foot's on the rope. And I'm like, nope, waved it off, said we're restarting the match.
Okay.
So it was great because the crowd had this like, yay, he won. Oh, it's not over. Okay. Right. And it was this really powerful moment because Frankie has this baby face, doesn't want to win because the ref made a mistake. He wants to win outright.
That's right.
So, and going from there, I mean, we immediately went to the go home. So it had this like big ol' like cycle of emotions of just like, yay, oh no, yay. So the crowd really ate it up.
Sure.
And maybe there's something to say there. Like maybe Frankie's right. Maybe it did make it better. I don't know. But I mean, it's just you kind of roll with the punches. Like things happen. Great. We can't. It's live. We can't predict everything that's going to happen. You just kind of have to roll with it and experience it in the moment.
Well, speaking as an old timer, that's the way they used to do matches all the time.
All the time. Yeah.
They just rolled with it.
Yeah, just call it in the ring, brother.
Exactly. That's how they did it.
Yeah, so it's like we plan a lot of stuff ahead of time now. I mean, it's 2020.
Right.
Like everything's called in the back.
Yeah.
We all know this.
But it doesn't always work out that way.
It doesn't always work. Or something really resonates that you weren't expecting. So we're going to kind of like go in a different direction and try this out a little bit because this is the only form of media where fans can, in real time, respond to what's happening.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, that's basically how I got in touch with like the Bucks and Cody and everyone else.
So when did you get the call? And who called you?
Oh boy. So
the AEW call.
The AEW call. So early 2019, when AEW had been announced, the Bucks started doing this thing where they'd show up at random independent shows.
Right.
So,
I was in one in Atlanta when they were there.
Right. So I was working the Defy show that they showed up at.
Okay.
And that was the same show that SCU was on. So all like Scorpio, Frankie, and CD. And it was a 3v3 with a bunch of the local guys. And I basically like twisted the arm of the other ref, like, I need this match. Like, you don't understand how much I need this match. So yeah, thanks Benjamin Roberts. He definitely did me a solid. So they show up, CD pulls me aside, and he's like, hey, we're talking about you for Double or Nothing. So depending on how things go, we may be discussing things with you afterwards. And I'm like, okay, cool. And at this point, there's no mention that the Bucks are going to be there at all because they were kind of quiet and on the down low. And if you ask the promoter, he was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
So I ref the match. It goes well. I'm in the back, and I wait behind the curtain, wait for all the other guys to come through, like shake their hands, give them water, ask if everyone's okay, all that. CD was the last one through. And then he's like, okay, so we'd like you for Double or Nothing. And he started throwing out numbers and all this stuff. And I'm like, I still have the main event to do tonight, which was a title match. And I'm like, oh God, like, please don't shit your pants. Please don't shit your pants.
I was thinking that your mind is really racing at that time.
Yeah, and I'm like, and I can't really tell anybody right now because I have to go meet up with these guys and call a match. Like, oh my God. Like, so that's essentially what had happened. Like, I had only come on for the one show. And Double or Nothing went well. And in the back, while the show is happening, Cody tells me that I'm going to ref his match with Darby at Fyter Fest. I'm like, I don't know if he knows that I don't have a contract for Fyter Fest, so this is going to be an awkward email, but hi.
Yeah.
And then they brought me on for all of the next 3 shows. They told me at the after party of Fyter Fest that I was going to be doing the Jericho Page match at All Out.
Wow.
So that was the most like stressful 2 months of my life.
I bet, yeah.
Just like, okay, I got to do cardio.
Right.
I got to get real ready for this because that title is super heavy.
Right.
Let's work some shoulders. Yeah.
Right. So we start. When did you get full time?
Full time. So I got the full time offer right after Fight for the Fallen.
Okay.
I signed it like immediately. But like starting full time, like getting the paycheck was September 1st.
Okay.
So it was the day after All Out.
Right.
Which was great because I had just gotten laid off from my video game job about a month prior.
Things happen for a reason.
Yay,
maybe I don't know.
Timing. I mean, the thing with video games is that's actually a pretty common occurrence.
Really?
Yeah, it's a very cyclical profit like scheme where you release something, you make a lot of money, and then years go by before anything else is released. So if you don't release something or there's no interest in your product at all, you basically end up shutting down and the whole team gets laid off.
I got that.
So it wasn't my first layoff. And the company I worked at the time was real good about like keeping us informed on everything. So I knew it was coming, which meant that like August was basically just a paid vacation because I got severance. And I knew that I was going to work at All Elite. So I ended up painting my hallway. Like,
nothing like severance pay.
It was dope,
nothing
dude.
like severance pay.
So good.
Yeah.
I got to keep my health care. It was awesome.
Right.
But yeah, so then I started with AEW in September. And then the weekly TV started up in October.
Right.
And that's just been my life ever since.
Okay, there's more than just Aubrey Edwards, the referee.
Yeah.
As far as All Elite Wrestling is concerned. Tell us about that.
So what was it? Probably, we were actually in Chicago for the Sears Center show. Okay. November-ish. And I get pulled aside by Nick Sobek, who's one of our VP business guys.
Right before Thanksgiving.
Right. And he basically tells me, like, hey, we saw your shoot resume. You've been doing all this project manager stuff for years. We feel like you would probably, be helpful with us. I'm like, yes, please. Like, I just want to help. I love this company. I love everything that they've done for me. I want to work here as long as I can. How can I make this company be better? So it was immediately like, he just tells me like, hey, we want to bring you on in like a project management capacity. I'm like, yes, where do I sign? Like, give me paperwork now. So I started as a project coordinator, and it's still very, very new and fresh and whatnot. Like, I would do a lot of the emailing back and forth for this podcast. I'm constantly just in touch with Stacy.
Yeah.
And then I text you because you don't read your email.
Right.
And then I email back. Yeah.
I read it when I need to.
You're welcome, Stacy. And I've got some other stuff I'm working on. I'm currently working on the AEW rulebook.
Oh.
So we can get our rules posted online. I have like grand visions of eventually merchandising that. So we have like a little like volume 1, and then like the refs have something they could sign, which would be dope.
Right.
I'm working on other stuff. I keep trying to like insert myself into this video game we keep talking about. So whether or not they want me to, I'm going to be working on that video game.
Sure. I get that.
I basically just try and find things. It's literally what I did in video games. There's a job that needs doing.
Right.
And something needs to be done in order to move forward progress. Cool. I'm just going to do it.
Yeah, that's smart. It's the same take on my job that I've always done.
Right.
Because another podcast that I do, not only am I on it, but I produce it and edit it
Exactly.
and put it because I want to learn more.
Right. I want to learn about all of the different aspects that make this
because
happen.
You learn more, you become more valuable to the company.
Correct.
Yes.
It's like I knew nothing about live television until I worked for AEW.
Right. It's crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's absolutely
Well,
nuts.
so now I want to talk to you a little bit about your work in the ring.
Yeah.
And the reception that you've had with the fans.
It's weird.
Yeah, because
It's
the
super
last
weird.
time that, and it's happened many, many times, when you come out, they'll start chanting your name, the fans will.
It's wild.
Right.
Like it's because as a ref, like I was taught, and it's also kind of my philosophy that you are never the focus of the match. It's always the wrestlers. You're
Right.
there to help them tell a story. So I'm there purely for other people. I'm never ever the center of attention, and I don't want to be. Like that's not why I got into the business. I took the role knowing full well what it was. So it's nice to be having the recognition. It's also just wild that like people know my name, like which is cool because AEW is allowing the referees to have personalities.
You
and
weren't always
personas.
Aubrey Edwards, though.
No, originally on the Indies I was Girl Hebner.
Yeah, I know.
Gearl.
Right. So they know your name, they chant your name, and it's a great reception. It really is.
It is like I mean I'm not gonna lie, like it feels real good.
Sure.
But it's wild that it's happened, that I've been given this platform, and that people are just so accepting of what it is that I do. And I mean, there's a lot more appreciation for referees now.
Sure.
Because they used to just kind of be the guys in the back that are made of glass, and if they take a single bump, they shatter.
Right.
Whereas like people follow me and they're like, oh, she's gonna kick Jericho's ass. Like
Sure. Right. Well, you have that look. I would say that's serious. There you go.
Right. It's
Give
like
it to
I
me.
have a very serious, concerned
Yeah,
face.
very serious look.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's
an in charge face.
right. It's
Right.
focused. It's assertive. It's confident. Like there's a lot of things that you just have to. I don't watch a lot of MMA because I don't actually like violence or fighting. I like the fake stuff. But if you watch like an MMA referee, like they're ready to get in there the moment that they have to.
Sure.
So every little step, even from the initial lockup, you have to be paying attention to. So I've kind of built my persona around that idea of literally this match could be over at any minute. So I need to treat it like it could be over at any minute. I'm essentially treating it like it's a shoot. And that's, I think, just resonated with a lot of people because part of what makes wrestling awesome is that suspension of disbelief where we all know it's predetermined. But halfway through the match, if you're like, I have no idea how this is going to end and I'm really excited about it, like that's what we want.
Yeah.
And anything I can do to help achieve that, like that's great. That's what I want.
I first saw you at Double or Nothing, and I saw how serious you were and how in charge you looked. And then I met you at the first TV tape, and I'm thinking, wow, she's nothing like that girl in the ring. What a personality.
The first TV
going,
taping,
yeah.
I was running around backstage trying to find a cameraman.
Yeah.
And you're like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm trying to find a goddamn cameraman. And I just like got real pissed off about it.
And I went, I'm going to like this lady a lot. Yeah.
And then when they asked me to do this podcast, I'm like, I don't want, like, why? Like, Tony and I don't have anything in common. And then the more I hang out with you, I'm like, oh, no, we have a lot in common.
Yeah, right.
And just like all of our sense of humors are very similar.
Sure, yeah.
Like, I'm all about dick jokes. You're all
Yeah.
about dick jokes. It works out.
Right.
But yeah, it's wild.
Sure.
This whole journey has been wild.
Yeah, it's been a good journey too. Now,
It's been super fun.
As being a female referee
Yeah.
in a male-oriented business, I'm sure there has been some blowback. Right?
Oh boy. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I mean, like, there's always going to be people who vocalize what they don't like. There's always that like really vocal minority.
Yeah, the ones that are behind the keyboards.
The ones that are behind the keyboards that are very like, oh well, I don't like this, blah 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 blah.
Right.
It's like it's fine. You're allowed to not like or like certain things. Like everyone's different. There's enough wrestling out there for you, whatever. But the thing that's really interesting is just how many. It's a very common occurrence where people just say like, I take too much attention away from the wrestlers. I'm too distracting. My favorite comment online once was that someone couldn't watch the match because my lipstick was too distracting. Yeah, I'm like, you're not paying attention to the
You're not
wrestling.
paying attention to the
Like,
match.
what the hell are you doing, buddy?
Yeah, you're a creeper.
Yeah, I think the social media team gets at least one email a week about me and how I'm a distraction and that people can't watch All Elite Wrestling because I'm on the TV.
So do you stay off of social media?
I
or-
have to.
Yeah.
Well, I don't stay off of social media. Like, I definitely still like I'm involved. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, all that, all the
Right.
time. But Yeah, I try and just only focus on the good stuff because I don't want to live my life focused on the negativity. Like, I'm a very lighthearted, bubbly person.
Well, you sure are.
I try and stay that way.
And of course, you're the co-host here on
AEW Unrestricted.
AEW Unrestricted. And
Yeah.
we remind you that you can get your Unrestricted podcast for free wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in to AEW Dynamite each and every Wednesday, 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central, and you'll see this very serious woman taking the attention away from the wrestlers.
Yeah, all the time. You also hear this awesome dude, Tony Schiavone.
Saying, yes, JR, you're right.
Yes, JR, you're
Okay.
right. Yes, Excalibur,
Okay.
you're right.
And I'm Tony Schiavone, and this is
Aubrey Edwards.
We'll see you. Thanks for listening
Peace.
to AEW Unrestricted.